Well, I talked to several musicians I work with in New York about your teaching and mentoring. One of them is Quincy Natchoff.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, he's a saxophone player that writes for a lot of diverse ensembles. He's got an album out. It was nominated for some Juno Awards.
yeah,
And Quinton stated that you're really good about thinking about the big picture of compositions and how sections relate to each other. Your concept of coming up with a few words that describe the character of the piece before starting to sketch it out is really helpful to stay focused on what the composer wants to say without getting lost in technical details. And it's also helpful to keep referencing back to that idea in order to make sure the intent is consistently there.
yeah.
He said you teach people to think of each piece as a whole, similar to a play or a novel, with recurring characters and how a character can be developed and changed from the beginning to return later as a changed individual because of what happened in the interim. And due to your many accomplishments as a performer, in addition to composing and arranging, you also can draw on personal experience when trying to teach information, important information about playing in an ensemble, writing for an ensemble, such as ranges and how ridiculous it might be to write very high flugel soli, as I was told you may have done in the Vanguard.
Yeah.
He ended by saying you're one of the best teachers because you have a way of not forcing your taste on whoever you're working with.
Yeah, well, he's a great musician, and yeah, he would just once in a while come to my place for a lesson, and he'd be working on some huge piece, a concerto or something and um, his one thing that his language, he had this very what to me seemed very complex kind of compositional language, but um, yeah, the whole thing of the one or two word idea of the piece to me is important. It's kind of the kernel of the piece, of what you're trying to say. And so I think a lot of times when people would come to me for a lesson, they were really tied up with the minutiae of, I've written 8 bars. What do I do now? Well, I don't know what to, and you got to step back and think, what am I doing here? What am I creating? So there's that famous quote. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a good quote from Michelangelo that somebody said, how did you do your sculpture of David? He said, I took a piece of marble and I started to chip away everything that didn't look like David. So that's part of, like you've got this universe of sound available to you, and you've got to decide what shouldn't be there so that what I'm trying to say emerges. And so the thing there is, first you got to figure out what you're trying to say. So I think that's important. I'm glad Quincy said that. I mean, that's, I think that's one of the basic things I try to get across to people.
Migiwa Miyajima, if you don't know who she is, she has a big band called Migi Augmented, and she was a finalist for the VMI Jazz Composers Workshop. She also mentioned when she was struggling with something, you were very supportive and encouraging, just to, in general, to let people really let loose composing. Whatever happens, you and the people in the workshop were going to be there to support her and tell her if she was going down the wrong path. And that's huge because
Yeah.
any professional musician trying something new can get really uncomfortable and it becomes very scary. So to have somebody there to catch you
Mm-hmm.
and make sure you're not making a fool out of yourself, it's really important.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the purposes of, for me, for any educational situation is to allow people to make mistakes and learn from them. A lot of times in the workshop, people would come in with stuff in their scores, and I'd think to myself, wow, this probably is not going to sound very good, but I didn't want to say to somebody, oh, don't do it this way. So I would say, look, I think this is problematic here, but don't take my word for it, because I don't know what you're hearing. And so go ahead and write it this way, and then at the reading session, see what you think, because that's part of the process of hearing what you wrote and then honestly asking yourself, does that sound the way I thought it was? Am I saying what I wanted to say here? Not, oh, Jim McNeely says you shouldn't do this. That's not a reason not. In fact, there are some people who would take that as a reason to do it. So I usually wouldn't say, unless it was really horrible. But most of the time there'd be things that I'd say, well, this is kind of interesting. I don't know if it's going to work. So I'd say, try it. And there were times I'd hear it at the reading session and I'd make a little note to myself, bass clarinet and flugelhorn up in that register is pretty nice, and I wouldn't normally have thought to do that. So I learned from people trying things. But you've got to try things. You don't just you don't learn by trying to please a teacher. You learn by trying stuff yourself. And then the teacher, then the job of the teacher is to say, well, how'd that work out? And you say, well, yes or no. And well, then let's talk about, what were you trying to do? What are some alternatives,
Something that Miho Hazama, which if you don't know Miho, she has her Grammy-nominated band M Unit, and she's written for many, many people. And I've worked with her under a number of situations, from her conducting to her performing her music. But she loves the concept that you teach about every single note needing to have a meaning.
Yeah, it's got to be there for a purpose. A sentence needs the proper words to get across the meaning of the sentence, no more, no less. And then the same thing with music. The notes, they have a theoretical meaning in the structure, but they also have a grammatical meaning and an emotional meaning. They've got they mean something. You're not just putting notes on a page. Even when I talk about notation with students, it comes to the point where I say, when you put an F on a page, think about what you're telling this person. Excuse me, Jennifer, on the first beat of bar 36, I want you to play an F down there for one beat and then rest. Not this F and not that one. There's every note is full of information and meaning when you're writing on the page, and sometimes people lose sight of that. They're just putting dots on the page. It's yeah.
As a player, I've sometimes gotten into some discussions about the choice that some composers make, and hopefully I'm not too annoying, but I have a long-standing argument with the leader of one of the bands I play in, Darcy James Argues Secret Society. He has a section where I am in a bucket mute in the pedal range,
right,
and the entire band is open and playing fortissimo. And I told him, I said, Darcy, it's like trying to swim with cement blocks on my feet. And he's like, this is the sound I want. And he's right, under the conditions of us all being mic'd. Of course, someone can always turn me up, but one day I'll win an argument with him, maybe. Today's not going to be that day. But ultimately, it's my job to just do what he tells me to as a player in a band, and ego shouldn't become a part of it.
Well, yeah, certainly if everyone's individually mic'd, and certainly in a recording situation, there are certain things that might carry the day. With the bass trombonist with the Frankfurt Radio Band, he just retired a couple of months ago. And there were times I'd have him down way at the bottom in a bucket mute. He just wouldn't bother to put the thing on. And then I'd realize after a while, oh, he's not playing. He's playing it open, and it sounds fine. So, you know, there are times when I've used that line. Well, that's what I want, or that's what I'm hearing. And then I realized, maybe not. Maybe you know, you think you're hearing that. I'm not speaking for Darcy. I'm just speaking for myself. And that's one thing that came up quite a bit in the workshop. And there were usually, you know, the trombone players like Scott Reeves or JC would be there, and someone would have all these bucket mutes happening. And Scott especially, he'd always say, you know, you can just tell us to play soft. We don't have to have. And I find myself, I use buckets less and less. It's got to be a very special circumstance to use them. But that came from experience and really asking myself when I'd hear them, is that the sound I really wanted?
I'll give you a little insight. My husband does not ever write mutes in the trombone because if it's his gig, he doesn't want to have to carry the mutes to the gig.
That's a great excuse. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. Especially bucket mutes. I mean, who's got room for a bucket mute, trombone bucket mute?
Something that Stephen Feifke talked about, that you have some great ways to describe how to implement certain techniques. Like he talked about your idea of the shadow and the shimmer.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's an orchestration idea that I have. I'm sure there's a more elegant way to describe it. And maybe when I'm in reading this biography of Ravel, I'll find the words to do it. But there's in orchestrating a melody with more than one instrument, to me, there's the core sound, and then that's the main octave that we're going to hear the thing in. And then there's the shimmer is usually an octave higher. Sometimes I might put a harmony mute a fifth above. But you're tweaking the overtones of the core sound. And then the shadow is usually just an octave below, either a trombone with a cup mute or sometimes a tenor saxophone, you know, play. Rich Perry has a wonderful way of playing a line on the tenor because he's one of the, and I know a number of tenor sax players like this, he refuses to even go near a clarinet. I don't think he can spell the word. And so, of course, you know, over the years, Thad wrote all this music that has clarinet in the first tenor parts. And he's got a way of playing them with a really soft embouchure. It's wonderful, you know, and to the point that sometimes I'll hear some of these charts played with the original clarinet being played, and it sounds funny to me. And I'll realize, wait, I'm used to Rich playing it with that way that he plays it, the clarinet sound on the tenor. But so there's the core sound, and then the shimmer and the shadow.
Gary Simoleon does that with bass clarinet too.
Yeah.
I have seen him play bass clarinet before. I
remember one night, for some reason, this was years and years ago, and he had a bass clarinet set up on a stand next to him, and John Moscow was on the microphone. He said, and on the baritone saxophone, Gary Simoleon, what is it? Is there a contractor in the house you're trying to impress? Because I've never known him to play. But I mean, when you play the baritone the way he does, yeah, you don't have to play bass.
I love him.
Yeah.
The final person that I talked to about you was Chris Davis.
Oh.
The amazing Chris Davis.
Yeah.
She called you a master of everything that you do. And she talked about her first lesson with you. And she was really nervous. So you said you were going to go make coffee, and you were gone for about 20 minutes, but you were listening to her through the floor.
Yeah. That was in our house in Montclair. The music room was up on the third floor. and it had been an attic, and the woman that owned the house before us had knocked down some walls, so it was this big open space. And I'd show the student into the room, and I'd say, just play the, relax, play the piano. I'll be downstairs. And sometimes what I would tell them I'd make coffee, but I'd just stand outside I'd close the door and just stand outside, and they'd be, I'd hear all this wonderful music, and I open the door and they'd stop, and I said, oh, keep going. No, that was just something and there's the sound of somebody they're not even warming up, they're just playing the piano, and it's up there to me with the sound of a symphony orchestra warming up on stage before the concert begins. This is wonderful, subtle sense of abandon, and just this cloud of sound that if you tried to write it, I mean, if you told them, okay, in this section of the piece, play as if you're warming up, they'd be so self-conscious they wouldn't know what to do. But yeah, these students I'd hear all this wonderful stuff coming out, and then I'd open up the door and it would shut down. And I'd try to say, well, let's keep that atmosphere going. Just because I'm in the room doesn't mean you shouldn't be that way.